Hi and welcome to a weekly outlook. This is Kim speaking on Monday the 18th of June. So before I get on and look at the technicals themselves, I just want to look at the fundamental data that's coming out this week. So we'll start off looking at Forex Factory here. This is my favourite diary of most of the diaries. I've still got a couple to review actually, but it's pretty timely. So today we've got a few speakers, mostly so you maybe just see this at later 6:30 p.m. So later today these speakers are due to kick off. Whether they will create much volatility, I doubt it, because it's at such forums, ECB forum on central banking. I'll be surprised after last week's performance that Draghi would be giving us anything or any data that's not known. Now he speaks for the next 2 days at this event. I believe he's certainly on Tuesday, and he may be somewhere. I thought he was there on Wednesday as well, but perhaps he's oh, there he is, Draghi. He's speaking there as well. So he's got a there you go. He's on a panel discussion on Wednesday. Due to speak. He just says he's speaking on Tuesday, so we may get some volatility around these periods, and he may say something marginally different, but in general he doesn't. He sticks to his normal script that he's as I said, the ECB meeting was last week, so I don't expect too much surprise from that. The side of that, then we've got the minutes for the Aussie dollar coming out 2:30 Tuesday morning, which could create a bit of volatility. Obviously there's stuff hidden in there that's not, I say hidden, but in there which won't necessarily be discussed outside of the minutes or meeting. And then really there's little house price index. It might have a little kicker for the Aussie there, but aside of that, there's nothing much else on Tuesday. Wednesday we've got quite a few speakers, as you can see, mostly I think all at the ECB or the European Central Bank forum. There we go, and Fed Pal is speaking there as well. Yep, they're all, he says, yeah, in Portugal. Yep, so they're all speaking there. 2:30 on the panel, so well, we'll see if there's any volatility there, but I doubt it too much. So very little overall on Wednesday. Thursday, of course, we've got the biggie for the UK. We've got the MPC decision. Now this was expected to at one stage to start being increased, and I noticed that that's obviously died off for now. So maybe it's July that they're increasing it. I may have got that wrong, but anyway. So the voting previous time is the key thing here, and as they've highlighted it here, bearing in mind that it's unlikely to see an increase. It will be how the voting goes, and if the voting just changes slightly to 306 or something like this, we'll see. The summary, policy summary, will be coming out at the same time, so look for some volatility in the pound around that time. It will give us maybe a bit of a future idea of where things are going. The most important number of the month coming out there. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Thursday is side of, let's just see, this is all Bank of England stuff. Unemployment claims of Bank of Carney speaking. He's speaking at 9:15 p.m. It's Mansion House dinner. Now that does create volatility quite often when he speaks on those Mansion House dinners, so be wary at Thursday 9:15 p.m. so we won't be trading during the day during that period. Right, okay, getting on to Friday. There's the usual flash manufacturing services data coming out by 9 o'clock. It's all done and dusted. The 8 and 8:30 news are the most important ones there. 9 o'clock really doesn't do too much. Can get a bit of volatility, 20 pips or so around those numbers. And let me see, that's what's on Friday? Oh, Canadian data. We ignore that anyway. Oh no. What have we got? Inflation, retail sales. Crikey, it's all coming out there, isn't it? We'll have to speak to our correspondent across in Canada regarding that data, but I may do that later. But realistically, we may get a bit of volatility Friday afternoon, but we'll all be down the pub probably by then. Anyway, seriously, let's go and have a look at the technicals and see where we're sitting at the moment. So I'm starting off with the euro dollar as I normally do. Let's look at the sentiment actually before I kick into the technicals. I just want to bring the sentiment here. So I'm looking at the the euro dollar, I'm looking at the asset manager, which is really the pension funds, the big money sitting there, institutional big money that's sitting there, and how it's sitting. Well, up until, well, this, bear in mind this is a flash shot on Tuesday, so things may change this Tuesday, and it'll be interesting come Friday evening how this has changed. But we saw a flood of positive money coming in here. Now, I was obviously quite bullish last week, so I can only blame myself following these big boys, but seriously, they've gone even more bullish on the euro. Just here, I looked at the leverage. If you look at the leveraged, which is more the hedge funds, and well, they've gone net a bit more negative, and I'm really looking at this negativity and net position here, a bit more negative. But there was positions out of both the negatives and it's just that more bullish positions came off than short positions effectively. So the short positions fell by less, but so we're still in that sort of net negativity sitting there in the short term for the hedge funds anyway. It'll be interesting, as I say, how things fly out for this Tuesday. It may be a similar case that these guys are just that bit ahead of the curve. Okay, so that's the euro, looking at it from a sentiment point of view. I was looking at traders are getting a bit neutral, actually a bit neutral on it when I was looking earlier on, retail traders, so that's okay. But looking where we are, so I've got a weekly trend line running across the lows here. It looks to me like it's trying to bounce off of that. If you look at the dailies here, we managed to grab a bounce off the lows of the previous bodies last Friday. We have got the weekly pivot above us. That may be a sufficient draw over the next day or two in these markets with very little data coming out. My thoughts are that we've not gone particularly bearish at the moment, or can't see a particularly bearish sentiment point of view from last week, but that was pre ECB meeting, of course. But we'll see how things flip over. But for now, it was only partially dovish when you kicked the can down the road there and looked at it a little bit more over the weekend, and it's euro may just stay within a range, and this may be the range that it's going to be sitting in for some time that we're seeing here. So that weekly pivot is certainly a possibility. If we do see a break of this is sort of the line in the sand for me here. If it does break down this point here, well, then we've got to go back to the weeklies and see, well, where's the support below us? Maybe that weekly 100 coming up, maybe a target if it starts pushing down round number of 114. Maybe a good enough sort of target to the downside if it does start selling off. Now, if you look across where my dotted line is here, you'll see that I'm going to have to point it out over here to the left hand side here, was an area of previous highs around that sort of zone, so it may just provide some support on the way down if it gets that far. Okay, so I'm erring, and the more I look at it this morning, I might be erring more bullish with the sentiment that's sitting there. But certainly I think it may be a bit rangy going ahead into this coming week. The pound, right, before we look at that, let's go and have a look at the sentiment on the pound, and if we can, where is it? There you are. So the sentiment on the pound, I'm going to start looking at the asset managers, so the pension money first, the bigger money, and well, it's got on a bit more eased off a little bit, I think is probably what it is. We got a few more longs coming in there. Net position was slightly possible that it would suggest maybe a near-term low from back there, and the interest may start pushing in more positively. To me, it's still very iffy when you look at the hedge funds and their position sizes overall. You can see they've dropped in this to where we are now, maybe picking up a little bit, but they dropped off quite considerably. Certainly the long side had dropped off considerably. It's picking up, and in fact this is net bullish. We're still seeing a net bullish position with the hedge funds. They're actually seeing the pound better than I do at times. So let's have a look at the technicals and how that's tying up. Well, it's not looking particularly bullish when you're looking at this technical chart. It put in a bearish pivot swing, and as I said, that is a bit of a monitor into last Tuesday, so it's always a bit of a delay when you look at that data, but you could never use it as for an intraday trading tool. It's much bigger time frame we're looking at, so it just gives us a big picture view of where the money is going, the big money is going. So looking at where we are, if we do start or continue breaking down here today, or I say today, this week, we could be running towards, again, looking at a weekly 100 as a possible support zone there. There are some points maybe that we could pick out on these previous highs, that but it's not quite as neat as the euro looks from that perspective. Now come down here and you see we double bottomed on Friday into the prior lows there, and again we've got a weekly pivot that's sitting above us, so it's neutral where we're sitting now this week. I think obviously the news on Thursday is going to drive it the most. Leading into that, maybe we'll just, as it's pretty much look like the euro will stay in a range bound zone. Of course we're closing in on talks with the European regarding Brexit, European with Europe, to discuss Brexit more and more, so that may create more volatility through this market. But at the moment it's handling it pretty well, despite some close votes and everything else that's sitting there. It really is handling things quite well, so maybe any positive news may have a bigger reaction to the upside, so we just need to be wary of that. Dollar yen, so go back, have a look at the situation on the old sentiment point of view. Now we're looking at this as yen against the US dollar, so it's a reversal position we're looking at here, just for those. Start looking at the asset managers first, and well, neutralish there, it's just flipped back positive. In terms of more strength maybe for the yen, slightly more positive, and the leverage side, the hedge funds, it's pretty flat. It is continuing on that more positive note though. Certainly a gain, money flowing in there to the positive on the yen, which would suggest on a chart downside, but what we're seeing currently upside. So we'll see how that flows through this week, and if things change, if we can push further into that original trend line, which is from these highs here. We've toyed around with this sort of near-term one enough now. I think I might just remove it. So just cluttering the chart at the moment. From here, it still looks potentially bullish. We haven't got a lot of options in this early part of the week, expiries, which I can see, which would normally stop it from moving too far. But when you look at the daily charts here, you can just see I think it's already hit the weekly pivot. It's just not really given us too much of a clue, although if you look at the trend, it's up. So the trend is certainly looking at upwards, but choppy, and you can see some of these intraday the days where they come back lower than the previous low, and then we sort of get another pitch up, and we see this time and time again with this currency. It's stuck a little bit, I think, and that's possibly why there's such quite a neutral stance sitting there. Now, remembering some of those positions may be a safety position that these traders are looking at, as the yen is seen as a safety currency. So if traders and the big money is starting to flow, that's just possibly money going to safety. Something to bear in mind. Okay, dollar yen. So dollar yen, Aussie dollar, Aussie dollar. Let's go and have a look at what the big funds are doing at the moment. Asset managers, well, they're still very negative. Crikey, but not as negative. The net positions are minus 30 here. It's easing, I would suggest, but still pretty negative sitting there. The leveraged money, the hedge funds, let's have a look. Again, easing, I would suggest, although the long positions were easing off, and you can see it's pretty flat here overall. This the net positions are quite I say neutral, but certainly not moving too much. So there we go. And when we look at what's happening here, where we've got that bearish pivot swing kicking in on a weekly perspective, now we could be selling off. There's a trend line across the lows there. If we start breaking that, well, we could soften further. Let's have a look look at the dailies. Well, weekly pivot above us. Let's see how we sit here. We're not too far off those prior lows. That may just give us a bit of support off those prior lows there, but it's sitting close to the lows at the moment. If it can hang in there, it may get back to that weekly pivot, at which time it may even be a reasonable point of selling. The way it's been moving, it's sort of short-term time frame, near-term time frame, it's pretty much in a downward trend. So looking pretty soft, but we, just remember, we have got some fundamental data out on Tuesday morning, I believe it is. Let me just check. Tuesday, Tuesday, we've got the minutes out on Tuesday, so that might just change things a little bit there, but probably not that much. Okay, Canadian dollar, and we'll have a look at where the money's sitting with Canadian dollar at the moment. And again, remember, just like dollar yen, it's inverted reverse, so it's again Canadian dollar instead of the US dollar, Canadian dollar. So what's that telling us? It's neutral. Pretty much a neutral picture from the hedge funds. It's flat. Slight net positivity coming through from the asset managers, so that would suggest we may see a tad to the downside, or at least a holding position. Well, last week saw us pushing up, breaking out a little bit, but as you can see on this as I said this morning on the update, these can only be used with a pinch of salt in a sense, because these upper trend lines, it's the lower trend line that's important. These are just literally a bit of a ceiling. Now, traders will trade off these ceilings, off these levels. I'm sure they'll be trying to sell into this. We've missed the more important trend line would have been this one down here, where it's actually gone bullish from. It's broken out of that trend line, but it may just use this shorter term, near-term trend line as a sort of point of resistance where it pulls back before pushing back up again. But it's not been an easy one for some time, and you can see from a daily perspective, I mean, even last week, apart from when we ran in on Thursday and pushed through, it never really pulled back from there. Oil slipped off a little bit, and it saw the softening of the Canadian dollar against the US dollar there, and it's pushed up further since. Today, well, selling down, we've got the weekly pivot below us. It may be it's got some more downside towards that weekly pivot at the moment. That short term may give us a little bounce. Longer term, I'm just looking at a weekly and I'm just thinking, well, wait for the bounce back off the trend line, off the something like the weekly 8 or something, if you're looking for the bounce to the upside. Overall, though, the bias is still towards, or you're looking higher lows, higher highs so far. The bias is still towards the upside. Okay, that's pretty much it from those markets. Let's have a look now at oil, as I normally do. And we got, I didn't notice it was on the agenda this week, but we have got, should have on Friday, and I can't see. Oh, there it is, OPEC on Friday. The slick report, as Derek in our room likes to call this. So we're moving on to the slick. OPEC meetings on Friday. Now, leading up to that, I would not be shocked if there was volatility in oil. It's you see at the weekly picture I'm showing here, still selling off a little bit here, and still got potential downside. There's talk of pumping up and increasing volumes again, which could see it rolling over this week. We're just seeing a bit of a bounce at the moment. It took a definite break of those prior lows there, but not closed below them yet, so we'll see how we go. Where we were sitting and how we were riding this may suggest we'll get down further towards the S2, but a lot will come from the rhetoric of the particular participants from the OPEC meeting prior to the meeting, maybe, and see what comments, and there's plenty of sub meetings going on prior to that event, so we'll see how it all pans out. But at the moment, it still looks like it's got more potential downside there, and certainly from what I'm hearing in terms of volumes being increased again and suggestions that more output is made, that would only see it ease down further. Okay, that's that, and finally the S&Ps, as I tend to look at. I'm going to look at the futures price here, the S&P's futures, and where we are with that, because it's given me a current day as well. From a weekly perspective here, we've been we had quite a shot up the week before last week. Again, just one of those choker weeks where it doesn't really get into any significant growth or movement in there. It's just literally, well, chopped around a little bit, tiny movements. Bigger sell-off this morning as we come through here. There is a decent trend line that we should be aware of if you're trading these. It runs across the lows here, just to watch for. If it starts breaking towards that level, it could be seen more bearish. We still haven't gone down to the monthly pivot at the moment. Weekly pivot's already done, so any break of this trend line, well, watch out obviously for support of the moving averages there, but it could pitch back to those prior lows that we saw way back on the 29th of May into that monthly pivot if it was to roll. Technically, just looking at what we're going, it's just probably consolidating, and there's nothing to suggest massive weakness here. There was a bit of divergence, maybe. Well, no, because the lower highs coming through. I was just looking; it's not really diverged as such. Maybe a tad on the smaller time frames, it might have got a bit of divergence through there. May kick a bit lower, but at this juncture, it still looks like it's just consolidation, and we may get this same sort of moves here, bit of support, and off it goes again. So yeah, nothing to shake people massively out of positions there, I don't think. Right, have a great week. Bye for now.